Hello everybody, I'm Kelly Albrecht. This is component teams in Jira, and that's what everybody's here for. How many people are using Jira? Everybody, how many people are thinking of using Jira? Okay. What about, how many people are in here because they have some kind of idea about what I might be talking about component teams? Like you're broken into component teams where you work, or you're interested about breaking up into component teams, just kind of thinking about how that might work. Okay. All right, so what can we do with Jira? How many people where they work, their Jira is pretty complicated? You feel it does a lot of stuff, a lot of steps, a lot of statuses. We can do almost anything with Jira. There's a lot of similarities when I think about Jira. I draw, we're all Drupal people in here, I assume. I can draw a lot of analogies in my head between Jira and Drupal a little bit, where you've got issue types just like you have content types, and you can add fields to them, and you can configure them to do all different things, and you can really build workflows and build out your issue types in a similar way that you kind of build out a content type. You think about what you want to add to it, what you want it to do later, so it's a similar mindset. So there's all that sort of stuff that is not our focus for today, but there are issue type schemes and field configurations and workflow schemes, screen schemes. Does anybody in here have to work with any of these things a little bit? So you're kind of a Jira. We got one person in the audience that probably does some Jira administration. Okay. Well, we're not really going to touch on that. I probably will a couple of times say to share your configuration if you're doing multiple projects. If you create a lot of projects, every time you create a project, if you have it create its own schemes as a Jira admin, that's just, well, it drives me nuts anyway, just to have schemes all over the place. Is that your experience? Schemes gone wild? I'm not really going to, we might mention this stuff, but we're not really going to talk about these things. This is really more on the back end. And one of the big reasons that I don't want to focus on it is because I want to focus on figuring out or having a mindset of thinking about how does Atlassian want us to use this product out of the box? And how can we work as a team to fit with some of that out of the box stuff? And if we are going to configure anything, keep that configuration simple and only do it when necessary. So as teams, we should be aspiring to be self-organizing, well-formed, and high-trust teams. So self-organizing means that we are able to think for ourselves and make the decisions for ourselves and see where change might be needed for the better and be empowered to make those decisions, those changes as a team. Everybody work in a place where that's the case on your team for the most part? Well, good. That's not the case for everybody. Sometimes people need approvals to make certain decisions. So those are some of the things we want to continuously improve on as a team in the place that we work. Well-formed means that we've gone through some hard stuff and we've figured out how to communicate and collaborate when things aren't going well. So there's four stages of team formation that you can think about there. Does anybody know what they are? Forming, storming, norming, and performing. So a well-formed team has gone through those stages. If you're on a new team, you might be forming and there's a lot of politeness, and you haven't really gone through any hard stuff yet. It's when you start going through the hard stuff that you need to figure out how to keep alignment and how to keep on the same page and how to make some of those decisions as a team. And once you get past that, you can start to normalize, and as you start normalizing, then you can start to continuously improve And a lot of the decisions that and conversations that you're going to want to have in terms of implementing or having Jira be implemented to match your component team structure, you're going to need to be able to go through these stages and be a well-formed team. So without techniques for continuous alignment and improvement, it's all too easy to self-organize ourselves into what is known as a Jira swamp. Has anybody heard of the term Jira swamp? So this would be when let's say that you're an empowered, self-organizing team, you make decisions, but you get out of alignment maybe with the other teams or maybe amongst each other, and you're able to make these decisions, but they're slightly different than the other decisions that other people or other teams are making, and you get just a lot of configuration, a lot of conflicting configuration. A sign that would be indicative that a Jira swamp is brewing in the configuration is if you go to edit an issue and there's maybe there's two label fields to enter. There's one called label and there's one called labels. I've seen this is common because for whatever reason one team or one person didn't see the label field on one screen, and they just went into the issue configuration and added it. But it was actually there, they just missed it. So now there's two, there's label and labels. So if you have a lot of that, you can get into what would be considered a Jira swamp. So if, when you want to think about having component teams represented in Jira, you're really going to need to solve a lot of this underlying stuff because you're going to need a consistency, what I would call a common core configuration, so that everybody's in alignment. Each team works a similar way to the other teams, and the underlying Jira configuration matches that. So I'm going to try to touch on that a little bit. I'm also not going to go slides all the way. What I would like to do is actually load up some Jira instances and hopefully draw some questions, and we can kind of go back and look at something or show me how that worked, kind of stuff. So it's not just a lecture. So what could go wrong when we are not in alignment? I described some things, but specifically the first one I want to touch on is let's say that we are a team and we're focused on a particular aspect that's been brought to us to work on. We could work on those tasks within a project with other people within that same project, or we could create our own project. Let me see. So in the instance of Jira that you work in, does it tend to be a lot of projects or just a few projects? A lot of projects? A few projects? Okay. All right. So is the tendency to create a new project? Who works in a Jira instance where the tendency is to create basically a new project for everything? Okay. It's not uncommon. It's easy to create projects. So you could have multiple projects, and then what you're going to need to work on is kind of the interoperability between the different issue types and the different workflows. And the trick there that you'll want, if you're the Jira admin, or if you're looking for a common core configuration, is when you create a new project, to share the configuration of another project. When you create the project, if you go into like advanced or more settings as you're creating it, you can choose to share a configuration. And that's beneficial because then if you have a shared configuration across a number of projects, you can improve that shared configuration over time. You can iterate on your own configuration rather than having one-off configurations for every project. If you decide to use the same project, then you don't have to share configuration across multiple projects. You've got the same configuration in the same project. But then what you've got to work on is how do you distinguish between how do you get multiple backlogs essentially within the same project? Because a project's only really going to have one backlog of stuff. But if you have multiple focuses within the same project, you're going to want multiple backlogs. And that's actually a tricky thing about multiple projects is you have multiple backlogs when you might want one backlog. You might want to have like an overview. So there's pros and cons either way. And if you're not thinking about those things, you can get into some trouble. You can get some trouble like too many statuses. Over here on the right is over here on the right. Has anybody seen anything like this? This is the issue edit view. You go to change the status, and I mean this stresses me out. So this is just what this happens pretty easily if you have a number of teams using the same Jira project, and the teams are empowered to add statuses. And somebody on one team liked in external review for the review status, but somebody else liked external review. They weren't really talking. So now you have in external review, and then somewhere along the way, somebody, a lot of people are more process-minded than others, right? So you can see, just to focus on external review in this example, get ready for external review, in external review, past external review. That's a lot of steps. Those are a lot of cues for issues to potentially pile up in, and that's a lot of conversations not happening. And I think that's a problem. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. You can also another thing that can go wrong is you end up with issues that are basically like mini projects. So a lot of this stuff doesn't necessarily have to do with component teams, but I think if you want to think about implementing a component team setup in Jira, you're going to want to kind of figure this stuff out. So a mini project as an issue is one where it's not broken down at all. It's that issue that's just in progress for a month because it's so big. You want to break your work down into small pieces so that they flow from to do to done as quickly as possible. But Jira will let you add tons and tons of configuration, and Jira will let you have an issue sit in progress forever. But it's up to you as a team to work as a team and use Jira as a tool to enhance your team collaboration. I've also seen, I don't know if anybody has seen this, where the sprint view will let you just create more and more sprints, and that's a handy way for people to just make lists on their sprint board because drag and drop is really nice. And so the difference between what I'm talking about and just planning future sprints, which should be okay, you should be able to kind of forecast out future sprints, and sometimes these lists will end up being like bug fixes for later, or stuff so-and-so thinks we should do, because it's really easy to categorize them, but it's really easy to also use Jira and get kind of swampy with it. Another one is epics for categorization. So the right way to use an epic is to treat an epic as our largest stories that have some value to them and will eventually be completed. And the epic will be broken down into stories, and the stories are within the epic. So we don't want the epic to be something that never ends and have an epic be like bug fixes, or an epic that's like 2019 accessibility issues. So it's just like, where it's just this container of that you're just going to keep throwing things into. I gave a Jira workshop yesterday that covered a lot of this stuff about breaking ideas down into initiatives, and then down into epics, and then down into stories and tasks and subtasks. And if you go to lastcallmedia.com/blog, a lot of those posts I posted recently because I finally finished them. I forced myself to finish them to give the workshop yesterday, so they're all up there and they're all fresh, so some additional reading there. But you want to get a sense of how to work in an agile manner and a lot of these concepts when you just go about. If you don't understand them and you try to use Jira, you end up using Jira the wrong way. So you want to be a well-formed agile team, and Jira is your tool to enhance that. So, and I think a lot of ways, if you try to figure out how Atlassian wants you to use the tool, you can kind of reverse engineer a little bit of those agile ways of working. But these are all kind of prerequisites to being comfortable with some of this configuration. That's the right way to use it. Does anybody know the difference between a label and a component in Jira? Does anybody say, I don't know that? I don't know that. Labels in Jira are kind of like free tagging on a blog, where Atlassian doesn't want anybody to take labels seriously. They're just, if you can't do what you want to do any other way that's provided to you by the software, and throwing a label on the thing helps you filter down based on it, use a label. But you can't manage labels. A label on an issue in one project is going to just show up on another issue on another project. I think a lot of times people come to Jira and they get very frustrated that they can't manage their labels, or somebody writes a stupid label somewhere else and now it's in your list. And the labels are just like free tags. You can use components the same way, but components, and we're definitely going to talk about components, have some special functionality, and this functionality is kind of indicative of how they can potentially be used. So a component, you can have a component lead. You can have a component description that shows when you hover over the component in certain places. You can have configuration for if an issue is triggered automatic assignment for some reason, it could automatically assign that issue to the component lead. So you have configuration for the components, and we're gonna leverage that in where we're gonna go with this. But you don't want to just be using components like throwaway tags on an issue, and you don't want to be using labels like serious categorization of project issues, because those labels are going to show up everywhere. But you can manage your components. Another thing that I've seen is misuse of the boards. Jira makes it really easy to create a board for anything. Who's familiar with this, with boards? I guess. Okay. All right. So a board is just like a view of issues, essentially. So if you think of like views is a view of content, and you can figure some sort of query, you can go to the issue search area of Jira and configure a query and save it, and you can use that query. You can create a board that uses that query. And if you add ranking to the order by on that, and actually Jira in the board config will give you an easy button to add ranking. That's what lets you drag and drop the order of the issues. So we'll look at that. But it's really flexible, right? You can have a board for any query. So I've seen where people are thinking about the next batch of work that they're going to do, and it's common to think like, okay, well, we got this next batch of work, we kind of know roughly what the issues are, let's do a query for those issues, and let's make a board for our next batch of work. So you can see, if you think about it, they do that batch of work, they finish that batch of work, then that board just sits, and now they're going to do their next batch of work, so they make a new query and a new board. So that's kind of like a misuse of boards. And if you combine that misuse of boards with the status issue, what you end up with is something like in the unmapped. Has anybody seen this in their board config? It's all the way on the right side of the board config. this issue, I would say that these two are not a problem, because if you cancel it and it disappears off your board, so it's unmapped, that means it's not going to show in a column on your board. That means that these 12 issues aren't going to show on the board, which is fine because they're canceled. These 43 aren't going to show on the board, which is fine because it's closed. You might have a done status that's showing on the board, and it's awaiting release, which when they're released, they'll disappear off the board. But this one, somebody added a review status, and it's unmapped. So there wasn't team communication. Not everybody knew this status was getting added, and somebody would have to keep checking this board config to know that there are 4 issues for review that aren't visible on the board. So you would have to drag this over to the for review column. But if you aren't aligned as a team on a common configuration that all the teams are using, you're going to end up with stuff slipping through the cracks. Or you're going to end up with really diligent project manager type people constantly checking all the cracks, which is a lot of wasted effort and a lot of stress. All right. So how do we fix this? No, we don't fix it with component teams. Just kidding. Common core configuration. So think about your Jira as a tool, actually think about yourself as a team, and if you're a team within other teams, think about those other teams too. You need some sort of like cross-team alignment. This is your tool that you're all using and you're all sharing, and it needs to be consistent. An easy way for me to think about this is, let's say that you have a product, and your product has all these different parts to it, and all the different people that work on the different parts are kind of focused on each of their goals, and they're kind of self-organizing around that goal. Now imagine that your product gets to the point where it makes sense to have a customer success team. So one of the teams that's really close to the customer, they're fielding all the bugs, they're providing that initial layer of support, they're escalating the complex stuff to the appropriate team. In order to provide reliable support, they're going to want to be able to know or have a sense of how those issues, what's going to happen from when they escalate that issue to when that issue gets done. And if they're escalating it to team A, which has one way of working, or team B, which has a completely different way of working, or team C, which they're not sure yet, and each one of the teams has a different way to get the issue escalated to them, that's chaotic for the customer support team. That's going to impact their ability to set expectations with the customer. So in order to provide reliable support, they're going to want there to be alignment across the teams, and there to be a consistency with how the whole organization operates and gets that value back to the customer. So one way to do this is to come together as a team, spend a little time on it. It's worth doing, and start to think about, for example, the statuses that you're using in the workflow. So I think with Jira, what I recommend in general is to keep it as simple as possible and handle the rest with teamwork. So like we saw those statuses before, where you had ready for external review, about to be externally reviewed, being externally reviewed, passing external. When you have all of that, that's a lot of missed opportunities for conversations, right? You could imagine if you just had one review status and you're doing daily stand-ups every day. How is it that the team isn't going to know what's going on with that issue? So the more statuses you have, the more columns you have, the more basically the more cues you have that an issue could potentially get caught up in, and the less conversations that you're having as a team. So the basic one that you're going to get when you start is just to do in progress done. That one's a little too simple, I think, for when teams are doing work. A good example, I think, of this that's good for collaboration is the pull request. So if you're coding something, you shouldn't just be all alone on that whole thing. You can have other people check out your code. This is a great way to kind of share the learning of what each other is doing and how each other works. And so you can work on that. You can put it into a review state, and somebody can jump in and review your work. So it's nice to add review. Another one that's nice to add is, maybe you don't. And this is all team dependent. This is something that you decide as a team, and then if you think adding a status really would make sense to try, then try it and make sure to regroup back and see if it really improves things. So waiting release is another one. Maybe on a particular team, you're not ready yet to just deploy every tiny little issue right to production as you complete it. You might want to batch them up and have a release of a batch of issues. But then there's a situation where issues are coming to the team, and they're coming to the team faster than they can do them. So it's not that you don't want, it can mess with your flow if all those issues are piling up in the to-do column, right? So that's where you start to think like, all right, we need a backlog of stuff, we need to groom this backlog, we need something before to do, and that's where you end up with this bottom row, where things come in, and they're new, but they're not next. So you can get them into your backlog, so it's not yet next, it's grooming, and as the stuff gets broken down and clarified, then it can put into, here's what's next. So as the team finishes one thing they're doing, and they're looking for the next thing to do, they go to the next column, and they pull an issue to themselves. So the point I want to make about all this is, even when you're trying to keep things as simple as possible, you still end up with a pretty serious workflow. So then to add more stuff onto that, it's already getting kind of a long chain of statuses, even if you do everything you can to try to keep it simple. So I wouldn't do many more than this, and if I did any more than this, it would have to have a really good reason that the team agreed on. Yes?
Are you suggesting that it's better to have this status workflow for all of your projects, or do you see often that project specific have their own workflow?
Well, so depending on the that's one reason to have different projects, right? If the way the project works by the nature of what it is you're trying to do is that different, then those should be different projects and different workflows. That's one reason to have different projects, because the statuses are so drastically different. So you're working on something different, and it requires you to do it in a completely different way.
So coming in as a new project owner, is there a way to determine if your status workflow is for and it's generic, or if it's specific to your project?
We'll start with the real simple ones and keep the statuses as generic as possible. So if you're the awaiting release, and then another one that I've seen that's common is awaiting merge, and that's because they don't for whatever reason the team isn't merging code in all the time. Those are pretty code specific, so that's going to be different needs than if you're a content team and you have like a draft approval publishing workflow. So your issues aren't going to make sense to end up as awaiting. Well, I mean, you could make it make sense, but you're doing two different things. So that might be a case where multiple projects is going to make more sense for maybe the web development team and the content team that's creating the content. But for a team to be working with multiple teams, so let's say this was a web development project, and you have people each of the teams are doing web development in some way. They're just working on different components of that web development project. They're all doing, their issues are all working through the same workflow. So that makes sense to keep that in the same project, but then to configure that project for those components that they're focused on. And that's what we're gonna jump into. Oh yeah. So you don't want to end up. You want to be really careful to not end up here. And if you did end up here, you better have some really good reasons that everybody on the team understands. Because you should, I don't think you should ever have this many statuses. The screenshot that this is from, we actually got all the teams together and we reduced that down. I'm not even sure if they're all showing up on that drop down, but I think it was over 20 that they actually had, and we got it down to like seven or something, 6 or 7. All right. We can go back, and if anybody has any Jira swampy questions they think of, we can go back to that stuff. But now that we've got all that stuff out of the way, and we're meeting as teams, and we're thinking about keeping things simple and only changing the setup if there's a really good reason to try something in the hopes of improving, we can think about adding, configuring the setup for component teams. So teams will naturally, in real life, outside of Jira, organize themselves around a common goal. And I think really what we're talking about is making Jira reflect that. There are a lot of different ways to use boards, but for me, boards are a tool for a team. The team should own its board, and the team should think about its board as as a tool for them to use to continuously improve. There are a lot of things on a board that you can tweak over time. You're going to be, if you're using your board this way, you're going to be flowing your work through it. The work could change over time, and you'll tweak your board over time to better fit that change in work. But you don't want to create a new board for every time the team takes on some different type of work. You want to have a filter for a way to get stuff onto your board, and then you can move the issues from to do to done. And so if you want to do component team boards, it's as simple as having your JQL for that board just be component equals team name. And anytime an issue is created and tagged with that component, it's going to show up on your board. Another thing to consider as a team in other teams is, does it make sense for people to just push their issues onto your board anytime they want? Or should they let you know in the issue that they think that this is something that you guys could take on, and you would tag that issue with your component to pull it to your own board? There's going to be a better flow and a better commitment if you operate on a pull model versus a push model. So it's pretty simple to do that. To have a board that your team owns, and the board can have a backlog that your team owns, and really you just get stuff onto it with a component. So if you're back to the example where, let's say you have 5 or 6 web development teams working on the same website in a single Jira project. There could be the front end team, there could be the back end team, there could be the CMS kind of configuration team. If the website's heavy on search, there could be the search team. And when an issue gets created, all it has to do to get to the right team is have the component team put on it. And you can configure the components to have the team lead. Maybe the team has a lead that's going to triage that issue from there, and so it could be automatically assigned to that team lead. It'll show up on their board, and you've got a pretty good flow. What you'll want at that point to add to that strategy is a triage board. So what happens if an issue gets created where somebody forgets to put a component on it, or an issue gets created, it's a bug, and somebody who is ever creating it isn't really sure what team it should go to, or they're not really sure yet what team to ask. So you can create a triage board where the JQL issue is not in any of these team components. So that way you've covered all your cracks. So it's either going to be on a component team board or it's going to be on the triage board. And the triage team is done when there are no issues on their board. So they're triaging. So they could have their own bugs that they're working on and figuring out how to deal with, or they could also get issues from the other teams, support issues or something. So we can look at, I have that set up. And the JQL gets a little bit more complex, but once you kind of get the idea of what you're trying to do, I think it's not too hard to follow along. But it's really important that teams have their own boards and their own backlogs so that they can own their own backlogs, they can be self-organizing around the value that their component is providing the project as a whole. That's going to remove the bottleneck of, say, if the project has a single product owner, you could actually have a product owner. Depending on the size of this whole thing, you could have a product owner on each component team, so it can scale out. This is actually kind of a way, if you don't want to pay the $350 per user for Jira Portfolio, you can. This is a good middle ground. I don't know if anybody's looked at Portfolio before. Anybody look at Jira Portfolio for any reason? All right, so I think what I'm going to do, actually, I'll just touch on each one of these, and then I'll just go clicking around in a setup for the remainder of the time. One cool thing that you can do is, let's say that you have, let's see, what's a good example? Let's say that you're the creative team. You're responsible for designing aspects that support the website, and you could have a board, and you could have a creative team component. So if issues are getting created elsewhere and they need some of your help, they get tagged with the creative team component, so they show up on your board. But you also have your own creative work that you're doing. So what you can do is you can create a swim lane across the top that is stuff from other teams that are asking for your help. So they tag their stuff with your component, and it shows up in this swim lane across the top, and below that are your issues that your team is working on. So you can kind of tell, like, here's where the collaboration is happening between the teams. One of the things that I think stands out about that is it's like, oh my God, now my boards are more complex, there's other teams' issues on my board. But I think my response to that is that the board is just visualizing this collaboration that's happening, right? Because if you're not doing that, then you're helping other teams, but it's harder to see it. And what you want the board to really do is to visualize what's actually happening. So the more that you can represent what's happening in your actual teamwork and represent it on the board, the better off you're going to be. So if it starts to look messy, maybe if you're accurately representing the work that you're doing amongst your team and amongst the other teams, and if the board starts to look messy, I think that's more an indication of maybe you need to re-examine the workflow with your team and the other teams than to edit the board to make it look better. I talked a little bit about push versus pull. Anybody put a hand up if they're familiar with the push versus pull? This is one of my favorite topics.
In Git or in Jira?
Oh, good. In terms of like collaborating and getting work done. Yeah. Right. So yeah. So we're not talking about Git where you push up to a repository or pull down a change. What we're talking about is an example of a push workflow would be that I just created a bunch of tasks. I assigned 3 to you and 2 to you and 1 to you. They've all got due dates on them. Figure them out and make sure you get them done by the due date. That's a push. That you've just pushed issues with probably varying degrees of description, and the people that have just had these issues pushed onto them need to figure it out. They probably don't feel truly responsible. They probably will have valid excuses as to why they can't meet the due date. They certainly haven't personally committed to these issues that have been pushed upon. A pull workflow, on the other hand, would be the issues are placed in an area where everybody knows to look for what's next, and they're put in a way, and the whole thing is set up in a way so that they know where to look, and they're able to ask questions, and they're able to make suggestions and maybe break the issue down further. but they're able to, really the point of the whole thing is that they pull the issue to themselves. And they say, this makes sense, I can do this, and I can probably do this by today or the end of the week or whatever. But either way, they've committed, they have that personal commitment. And as human beings, when we make commitments, we keep them because we know that commitments are the currency of trust, and trust is important in just surviving. So that's what you really want, is that commitment. So you don't want to just, if you keep that in mind, then you're not just going to be pushing your issues on other people's boards and in other people's collaboration swim lanes. You're going to want to communicate as a team, and you're going to want those component teams to pull that task in, commit to doing that task. So that's an important distinction. But really what this speaks to is something that's really important about component teams, and that is that when you're on a component team, you're one component of a larger goal or a larger effort, and you're a component within, side by side with other components, and you all need to work together. And so there's a lot of stuff that doesn't have to do with Jira, but that Jira is built to be used in the context of working in these ways. So it's really important that the team meets every day, and they walk the board. The Jira board is it's virtual, it's on a screen, but what you want to do is you want to make that information be relevant. Any questions?
I just wanted to say, I really love Jira.
Yeah.
I didn't at first.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I do with my team is I do push the tickets out, but I think what happens in the collaboration is then we determine sometimes people have their own lane and they become subtasks, and I think that that's a great feature of it, that you can, sometimes we'll have a task and it actually will then seem to be like, well, you do this part and you do that part. Everybody kind of has their own specialty, so they all kind of feed up to this one task.
Yeah.
And it makes it a lot easier to kind of manage that whole project.
Right.
Inside the project without creating something.
Right. And then something that you just said made me realize that I really got into this push versus pull thing, but I've also realized that I think in thinking about it, you want to go a little bit further and think about, well, I've been thinking about it lately more as push, pull, or pass. Because one of the things that I see on teams a lot is they do finish their part, and they know that, and they write their update and they assign it to someone else. And so at first I was thinking, oh, they're just pushing tasks all over the place. But there's a difference between pushing it on somebody who's not expecting it and passing it to someone who's basically, it's implied that they're saying, hey, here's, this part's ready for you, you're ready for it, and when you're done, pass it back to me. So I think there is, so there's not like a hard and fast rule on whether it's a push or a pass. I think that's for the team to that's something that like the team can get a sense of. So when you say you do push the tasks out, in some sense, if the team's healthy, they're all waiting for that pass, basically.
I push it out based on specialty. Like somebody's a full fusion developer, he gets them, and then I know he farms it out to where he needs to.
Right.
Yeah, but I was going to also say, I also use the priority field, and I met with my development team, and we took the priorities and established timelines for them.
Okay.
So urgent meant like 2 days, and then we went all the way down to you have 8 weeks to get something out.
Sure.
So once we all established what that was, that kind of helped with, wondering how long something was going to take for them to happen.
Right. And so, but in your team, you guys came up with that, and that's an explicit way of working. That's great. That's how you want to do that. I have a little example that I'll show with the subtask thing that we started doing with the collaboration swim lane. It's kind of cool. But you want your boards to be relevant, and one of the things that helps the board be relevant every day is if the tasks are broken down really small, because that means the board's going to be a little bit different every day. If your if you're not breaking down your work enough and your issues are big and they take multiple days and the issue is just sitting in progress for days and days and days, then it's kind of like, why are we meeting? This board's the same every day. So one of the things that can help that the board gain relevancy every day is if the tasks are broken down small. But if you're using like a collaboration swim lane, you're going to want to meet every day, because what's changing in that that collaboration swim lane could change frequently based on when people need your help and when stuff is getting into that swim lane. So you'll want to meet. I guess just a little tip about that is I like to start at the far right column, so stuff that's kind of in review, and make sure that we either get it back in progress or get it pushed out of the way, and then move to the in progress column and see what's stuck there and try to get it to review or try to get it done, and then look at the to do column to see what's next. Let's start from the right to the left. All right. Actually, this is my last slide before jumping in. Let's see. All right, so I think I'm just going to use my site here. All right, so here's one of those collaboration swim lanes right at the top here, and below that is what we're looking at here is a board for the creative team, and it's a creative team component in the Last Call Media software project. So they have their own creative issues down here, and they're part of the LCM creative component. But then these issues up here are ones from other projects. So this one over here is from the web team. This one over here is from the content project. And these are done. This one right here with the gray, these ones with the gray border are ones that I'm trying something new with subtasks. So actually, if we go to this, I just wrote these blog posts here. So if we go to this issue, go to its parent issue. And so we have this parent issue is a blog post that's written, and it's in the review state, but it needs a hero image, it needs to be posted, there's some duplicate content, it needs to go on social media, so it has these subtasks. And these subtasks, sorry, I kind of jumped to the newest thing because I guess it's the freshest in my mind, but these subtasks have a different workflow than normal content. But when they get tagged with the creative component, that's what makes them show up on the creative board. And since they are subtasks, it kind of puts them in the little context of what they are. And we can get a little more width here. Yes. How many people are using cloud or server? Server. Most people are using server. So this interface looks a little open and bare. That's what cloud is working on their UX, which is trying to get not give you too much information. But if you can make sense of this, I think server is easier to know what's going on. I could switch to a server instance, but so let's look at this board. Oh, did you have a question?
Yes. Is the start timer, is that an extension or is that built in? Because I saw on previous screen or two when you had that side where it said start timer with a big green button.
This right here. This is Harvest. Yeah, this is a add-on, a free. Yeah, this is it's a free add-on. But you can Jira has logging time.
Yeah, I manually have to rewind the time because I don't usually log my time until I'm done.
Yeah.
So then I gotta go and manually move the hours, and then I'm like, well, how good is this if I split it into two parts of my day? I'm like, I gotta log it twice.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't. They're not using log work on this Jira instance. They're using the Harvest one instead here. Great. All right, so let's look at this board, the board settings here for this. So the base filter query is pretty simple, just component equals this. The creative team doesn't do releases, so they have this additional subfilter which if the resolution is empty or the resolution date is more than 5 days ago, well, anyway, this will let the issues fall off the done column after 5 days. So it's pretty simple, and other projects that need creative help can tag their issues with the LCM creative component. Shows up on their board. The next one I'll show you is we have a support board which functions as the triage board. I think I'm just about out of time here. If we had to go to the support team, they have swim lanes for configured SLAs, and they're accepting support from a lot of different projects. But I'll show you the filter gets a little more complicated because we wanted this team to be able to accept issues without a component, so that they can be the triage team, but they'll also accept issues that have their component team component tag on them. But you can see they've got a lot of projects on this board. All right, so that was a kind of went on for a while, but I'm wondering, like, does anybody have any questions about this topic? Like, you came in here thinking it sounded interesting, and then I talked for a while, and any thoughts about this idea? You got, if you've got a product and you've got different aspects to it, using Jira to break the teams up. Yeah.
Sorry, I have another question. So I haven't really heard the term component. I guess I didn't notice it on the filter, but that's fields.
Yeah. So if I go into the project settings of a Jira project, got the components right here.
So can they be specifically defined by project?
Right. They're per project, managed per project. But you can add the same component to multiple projects, and it works across multiple projects.
So by default, do you get a whole bunch of components when you set up a new project?
You get 0. So if you set up a brand new Jira project, you'll have 0 components. And so you were talking about based on you push out issues based on expertise. You could have a component. So what is, like, let's say, like, the front end. There's a front end team. There's a lot of issues that come in that are very front end focused, and then issue comes in from there, and you assign it to the front end team. It shows up on the front end team's board, and you could configure. We're not currently using this, but that person that you know is the lead. Let's say it was me. You could configure it to automatically assign it to the component lead. So I could be the front end expert, and an issue comes in and I basically, by agreeing to have this be configured, I'm saying I'm open for a pass. I'm open for you to pass an issue to me, and whenever they come in, I want to know about it. I want it to show up on my board. I want to see that I'm assigned, and then I can figure out what to do with it. So you could have in your project, you could have 5 or 6 different teams, and they could each have a component, and it could work just like that. Issues come in, divvy them all out. Yep.
I was just going to say, we use them. We have fairly small teams, so typically our 3 components that I use a lot are development, design, and logistics.
Yep.
And it makes it sort of nice when we're walking the board, we can put the design filter on the top of the board, and just see the design ones we're going to plan, or the development ones we're going to plan, or logistics are the ones for me when I'm at the end. So they're quite nice.
Yeah. So it sounds like you're kind of using it that way.
The simple ones.
You may not have. Well, it sounds like you might. not need separate boards because you're all it seems like you're meeting at the same.
Yeah.
Which is if you're all working as one big team, then it sounds like that's a good modification. Yep.
Are your slides online somewhere?
I made them this morning, but I can put them. But I can put them up. Yeah, this is I've been helping a lot of teams kind of break down their project into smaller pieces, and this has kind of been evolving as like a way to represent that in Jira. So I wanted to force myself to put some slides together, and submitting a session proposal is a great way to do that. But I think if we got to be out of here at 11, and we got 4 more minutes, or we're either that or we're over time. But definitely want to make sure that if I can answer any questions or go to any other screen. I don't know why I lost. Yeah, but thanks, guys.